welcome in. Often I get asked questions on how to navigate challenging relationships, especially those who are most close to us, whether it's family members or partners. And I have my fair share of these in my life. So I have no shortage of things to work with. And just a disclaimer before I go into some perspectives on this. By no means have I figured this out, right? I just try different stuff and I work with it. And mostly I try my best to show up. So that's the first thing I want to talk about is I think there's a lot to be said for just showing up to the process with someone. And of course, that process can look a lot of different ways, whether they want to communicate with us or not. That process can look a lot of different ways in how skillful they are or skillful we are at communication, verbal communication. And either way, I think the main thing we can do to work with challenging relationships in our life with others is just show up, just continually show up and come with an attitude that you're willing to work with it. So this really is kind of taking the first step from our side, which is not turning away from something that is challenging. I do want to acknowledge here, because this will probably come up in the comments, is, there are some relationships that are harmful in our life, and it doesn't mean we need to show up to them physically, right, or verbally. So I just want to point that out. Showing up doesn't mean with our bodies and speech sometimes. It just means showing up with an intention of being willing to work with it. And sometimes working with it is creating distance, putting a boundary, right? So I just want to say that right off the bat. And that's also a challenging thing to discern in and of itself, which goes back to the first thing I said. This is still a work in progress for me because even one particular relationship in my life, the approach I take with it or what it requires can be different each time I'm meeting or engaging with that person. So it's not like there's a right and wrong here. It's not like there's an answer for how to do it. There's just a general approach. And for me, the first thing is being willing to work with my mind, my emotions, my relationship to what's being triggered or evoked in me. And then, of course, how I'm showing up to that person if need be. So to me, the second thing I wanted to talk about was this root of compassion that we can bring to working with challenges in our relationships. And the essence of compassion is really just being willing to meet things that are uncomfortable. And for me, this often starts with the uncomfort in my body, right? Whether that's an uncomfortable thought or emotion or sensation. And it doesn't mean that the uncomfort is correct or right. It just means that it's happening. And when something's happening, if we turn away from it, we're actually turning away from reality to a certain degree. Now, again, little caveat here. If you need a break, take a break, right? So it's not like we're, forcing our eyes open to everything. No, sometimes we need a break, but we take a break in order to renew so we can come back to our work of compassion. And compassion has multiple sides, but I'll just talk about two sides here, which is, as I said, compassion to ourselves and the contents of our experience. And then, of course, compassion to the one we're having challenges with, to the other person. So I've often found it the most helpful to work with either simultaneously, if I'm with someone physically, or first work with my side of the street, work with compassion towards, the different kinds of emotions that are rising within me. Often in challenging relationships, for me, I'm dealing with impatience and different forms of aversion, right? Sometimes I'm dealing with sadness because something isn't going the way I want it to, or I've been disappointed by someone else. And of course, there can be many more emotions, but those are just a few that arise for me often. And so I'm working with those. I'm applying practices such as the different kinds of compassion, somatic compassion techniques I teach here on my channels, on my podcast. I use those all day long, right? To meet the moment, to meet what's arising within my experience with compassion, right? And compassion is the act of meeting things that are uncomfortable, to meeting different kinds of experiences. What I notice over time, again, I'm not saying get it right, but I notice this helps me to approach other people I'm having challenges with in a much more skillful way, right? Again, I don't mean it always goes well, right? But it at least allows a kind of space to develop where I'm not just reacting, from my emotion that I'm struggling with, or my perspective on the situation or person or relationship. There's some space, and that space allows the other person to have space, right? Space to listen to them, to hear them. Sometimes for me, it's space, giving them space, like not saying something, which is tough for me. Giving space for them to just be and feel what they feel, right? And sometimes it's space in a conversation to find the right moment to share something that's difficult to share, right? That it is is hopefully going to serve both of us moving through that challenge. So this is really one of the key ways. And I think here, this is where meditation really comes in to affecting our relationships. Because for me, meditation is not just about sitting on the meditation cushion in the morning. That is I call that my laboratory. That's my laboratory in the morning where, I'm not distracted by so much stimulus, phone, conversations, etc. I'm just sitting quietly and working with my mind and working with my emotions, and often working with different kinds of Buddhist practices. But the point of that is that when I get up off of that cushion, that there's the post meditation, there's the meditation I bring into my daily activities. And what does daily activities mean? It also means my relationships, whether they're going well or not. So this is where an approach of compassion and awareness really help. Compassion is the approach of how we meet ourselves and others, meaning being open to sitting with discomfort. And awareness is our ability we develop in meditation to not only bear witness, but to actually see and know things without that knee-jerk reaction, right? Because we can be aware, for instance, that impatience or sadness is arising for us, but we don't have to necessarily react. If we're aware of that, we actually have more choice. Again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier. We have more space. There's more fluidity to work with ourselves. And then, of course, to work with someone else. So this is where I think relationally, meditation just has so much benefit, because it's not about creating so much calm that we're so chill. I don't know. I mean, that's fine. That's an approach. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. Definitely not in the beginning. There's nothing wrong with that. Often we just need that chill space. But I don't know if being chill is the most functional. Like sometimes we don't need chill. We need like action. We need, I don't know if I want to go as far to say intensity, but we need to be involved. And that requires energy, that requires engagement. I don't think that necessarily requires anger most of the time, but it definitely requires engagement. Compassion is very engaged, right? So when I refer to space, I'm not necessarily talking about being a chill person. I just mean that we know how to relate with ourselves, right? We have the space internally to provide the kindness of space externally when there's a challenge coming up in one of our relationships, right? And again, just to reiterate, challenges don't mean we're doing something wrong, or even that the other person is doing something wrong. This is one thing I reflect on to help me with this when I start to feel frustrated. We all are viewing the world individually. And that doesn't mean there's not a collective world we share. There is. And it doesn't mean there's things in common, that there's not things in common. There are. But we're also perceiving those things in common individually. And so when we acknowledge that and recognize that, there's even more space for the other person. There's more space for ourselves, because we see, the way we're looking at something is not necessarily how someone else is looking at it, right? And even with that basic truth, we can also see how they're looking at it, the approach they're taking, or maybe what we consider confusion they're getting into. it's not that they're wrong, it's that that's what they're seeing. And if we can try to see what they're seeing, even more empathy and compassion can develop, right? Because then we can hold them in that space. It doesn't mean not hold someone accountable, right? If they're doing something harmful, it just means we're able to see why they're doing what they're doing. And this allows proper communication to take place a little bit more. So just to recap, start on your side of the street. That's my recommendation. It's painful, but just work with your side, your emotions, your perspectives, your ideas, your beliefs around what's going on in that particular challenging relationship. Open those up and then approach the other person or allow them to approach you, whatever the circumstance, and see if you can then work with space for them, right? And so this can all be done, as I said, in the presence of someone we're having a challenge with, or it can be done before we meet them or after we meet them. Often it's like we can think of this as the rehearsal, where athletes, great musicians, all kinds of people who grow to be skillful at a certain talent or a certain thing they're doing, they rehearse a lot, right? And then when we see them perform or play the game, like the big game, they've literally done that thousands and thousands of times, right? So when they're performing or in front of others, it can seem a little bit more fluid and seamless, but actually they've just practiced. So we can also do that. We can practice how we might approach someone that we're having a challenge with, how we might speak with them, practice working with our emotions and reactions, right? And so then when the big game happens, when we're actually in the presence of this person, there's a chance there can be a more skillful and harmonious and compassionate interaction, right? And compassion just means here that we're trying to create some kind of harmony so we're not, in more pain. And the other person isn't in more pain, right? So here we can all naturally see that when there's harmony in relationship, there's more contentment. When things are disharmonious, we tend to experience less contentment, right? And then of course, sometimes we can't control that. And when we can't control it and we're trying to make things, content all the time, sometimes we just have to give some space and release for a little bit and come back to the drawing board. So anyways, this is just some of the things I do on a regular basis when I'm faced with challenges in my personal relationships. I hope these can be helpful to you. This is a broad area, so if you're watching this on YouTube, please comment if any of this is resonating with you, and or if you have some things to say, if there's things that you do that really help. Similarly, if you're listening to this as an audio and on my podcast, you can reach out to me at scotttusa.com or go comment on YouTube and let me know, some things that you use when things get tough, right? So thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, best of luck.